No matter what star you happen to be born under, a fatal wound always leaves the same brown stain. When they dragged humanity before the galactic court, they waved pristine, centuries-old rulebooks in our faces, branding us monsters and war criminals. They genuinely believed their ancient laws would bind us, forgetting one crucial detail: humans write their own damn rules. Sweat pooled at the base of Micah's neck, trapped by the stiff, synthetic collar of his dress uniform. The fabric smelled faintly of dry-cleaning chemicals and old fear. He shifted in his seat, wincing as the movement pulled at the tight scar tissue running down his ribs. The chair he was sitting in was designed for something with an extra joint in its spine, a sleek, ivory-colored piece of abstract art that dug directly into Micah's lumbar. Violation of Accord 7, Article 4. The translation earpiece buzzed. The voice in his ear was a flat, synthesized monotone. It stripped all the indignation from the towering, mantis-like creature clicking its mandibles at the center of the amphitheater. The deployment of autonomous, kinetic weapons in a populated atmosphere. Micah didn't look up. He was busy staring at a scuff mark on the toe of his right boot. Standard issue leather, scuffed on the iron-rich dirt of a world 300 light-years away. He rubbed his thumb over his index finger, feeling the rough, raised edges of a burn scar. He should be taking notes. He wasn't. Violation of Accord 9, Article 2. The earpiece droned on, merciless and steady. Use of localized incendiary compounds designed to adhere to biological material. Unnecessary suffering. Disproportionate force. The air in the Grand Assembly smelled wrong. It was too clean. It smelled like the inside of a surgical ward mixed with the ozone tang of a dying battery. No dust, no moisture, no smell of sweat or breath. Just sterile, recycled oxygen pumped through vents designed by species who had fought their last actual war 500 years ago. They had rules for combat. Polite, sanitized rules. You met on an empty moon. You fired energy weapons that cauterize wounds instantly. When your ship took too much damage, a sensor tripped, a flag was raised, and you surrendered. It was a game of fencing, a gentleman's dispute over territory and trade routes. Humanity had shown up to the fencing match with a rusty crowbar. Representative Hayes, a voice echoed, bypassing the earpiece. It was the Arbiter, a being of shifting, iridescent scales that made Micah's eyes ache if he stared too long. Its voice was translated through the room's overarching speakers, booming with artificial authority. Are you documenting these charges? Your silence is being recorded as indifference. Micah cleared his throat. It felt full of sand. He hadn't slept in 40 hours, fueled only by bitter spaceport coffee that currently sat like a rock in his stomach, churning out a steady stream of acid reflux. I'm listening, Micah said. His voice cracked. He sounded pathetic. He didn't care. He reached for the glass of water on the curved desk in front of him. The glass was too narrow, designed for slender, multi-jointed fingers. He gripped it awkwardly, taking a sip. The water tasted distilled, completely empty of minerals. It didn't quench his thirst. It just made his mouth feel hollow. He set the glass down. The soft clink echoed in the massive, domed chamber. Thousands of eyes compound. Reptilian, wide mammalian orbs bored into him from the tiered seating above. They hated him. They hated humanity, not just because of the blood we spilled, but because we broke the illusion. The Coalition had built a neat, orderly universe where violence was an administrative task. When the Colossian Empire pushed into the Orion colonies, they expected Earth to play by the rules. They expected an elegant surrender when their silver dreadnoughts parked in low orbit. Instead, General Reed had ordered civilian freighters to pack their cargo holds with iron slag, strip the safety limiters off the engines, and drive them straight into the Colossian fleet at a fraction of light speed. No clean energy burns. No honorable surrender. Just millions of tons of kinetic hate tearing through shields, hulls, and living bone. The list of infractions is unprecedented, the arbiter continued, reading from a hovering data slate that glowed a soft, accusing blue. Chemical defoliants on agricultural sectors, weaponized weather modifiers, and the documented incident on Grid 44 where human forces feigned a communication breakdown to lure a medical frigate into a tethered minefield. Micah winced. Not out of guilt, though he supposed he should feel some. He winced because a sharp pain shot through his left knee. Grid 44. The damp, freezing mud of that colony world had seeped into his joints and never really left. He closed his eyes for a second, and the sterile courtroom vanished. He smelled the iron-rich mud. He heard the deafening, rhythmic thud of Colossian artillery chewing up the tree line. He saw Miller, his radio man, bleeding out from a piece of shrapnel the size of a dinner plate. They were cut off, dying. The Colossian medical frigate had hovered overhead, broadcasting a surrender demand masked as a humanitarian rescue. If Micah surrendered, his men would be taken as prisoners of war, given a clean room, fed. But the colony behind them would fall. So, Micah had killed the radio. He ordered his men to play dead in the freezing mud. They waited for 3 hours while the frost bit into their fingers and toes. When the frigate descended to collect the corpses, Micah blew the mines they had buried beneath their own wounded. It was a war crime. It was a filthy, cowardly, dishonorable act. It also bought the evacuation transports enough time to get 3,000 civilians off-world. The coalition, the arbiter said, raising its scaled head, was founded on the principle that even in conflict, we retain our civilization. We do not revert to beasts. Your species has demonstrated a complete disregard for the combat laws established by the High Council. You have fought without honor, without restraint. You are butchers in suits. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was heavy, suffocating. The hum of the lighting rigs above felt like a physical weight pressing down on Micah's shoulders. He was supposed to apologize. He was supposed to beg for leniency, to offer reparations, to promise that Earth would submit to coalition oversight and disarmament. That was the script. His superiors back in Geneva had given him a 70-page speech written by a committee of cowards, full of platitudes about cultural misunderstandings and a shared, peaceful future. Micah reached into the breast pocket of his jacket. His thick fingers brushed against the crisp, folded paper of the speech. He left it there. Instead, he pulled out a crumpled pack of chewing gum, peppermint. He popped a piece into his mouth and started chewing. The sharp, artificial mint flavor cut through the sterile ozone taste of the room. It grounded him. It reminded him of gas station convenience stores back home. Representative Hayes, the arbiter hissed. The translation software struggled to capture the sheer, vibrating annoyance in the alien's tone. Do you have a response to these charges? Or does humanity concede to the violations of the combat law? Micah pushed himself out of the terrible ergonomic chair. His bad knee popped audibly in the quiet room. He didn't stride confidently to the center podium like a hero in a broadcast drama. He shuffled. He favored his bad leg. His shoulders slumped under the weight of his ill-fitting suit. He stopped at the microphone. It was hovering too high, adjusted for the tall, graceful species that usually occupied this floor. Micah reached up, grabbed the slender metal stalk, and wrenched it down. It let out a loud, ugly squeal of audio feedback. Several delegates in the front rows clutched at their auditory organs, wincing in pain. "Sorry," Micah mumbled. His tone was entirely unapologetic. He tapped the mic twice with a heavy finger. "Is this on?" "Yeah." "Okay." He leaned heavily on the podium. The metal was cold against his palms. He looked up at the tiers of alien dignitaries. They looked like a zoo populated by gods. Beautiful, ancient, pristine. Silk robes, polished scales, glowing cybernetics. None of them had ever smelled burning flesh. None of them had ever held the hand of a 19-year-old kid while he bled out in a trench, calling for a mother who was 3 solar systems away. They didn't know anything. "You're right," Micah said. His voice was gravelly, low. The translation software smoothed out the English, but the raw, bone-deep exhaustion carried through the acoustics of the hall. "We broke your rules. Every single one of them," Micah said, looking slowly across the room. "We used kinetic weapons. We used white phosphorus. We shot the medics. We blew up the bridges. We poisoned the wells." A murmur rippled through the assembly. Outrage, shock, disgust. Confessions in the Grand Assembly were supposed to be couched in diplomatic legalese, deflecting blame. They weren't supposed to be this blunt. "You stand there and you call us monsters," Micah continued, chewing slowly on his gum. He pointed a finger at the Arbiter. "You wave this accord at us. You tell us we violated the laws of combat." He stopped chewing. He swallowed hard, the mint burning the back of his dry throat. "But here's the thing you don't understand about humans," Micah said softly. He leaned closer to the microphone. The room quieted down, straining to hear him. "We didn't break your rules because we're beasts. We broke them because your rules are a joke." The Arbiter slammed a heavy, scaled hand onto its desk. The sound cracked like a whip. "Insolence! You mock the foundation of galactic peace. You stand in the halls of—" "Peace?" Micah barked. The sudden volume made his own ears ring. He gripped the edges of the podium so hard his knuckles turned white. His heart hammered in his chest, a sudden spike of adrenaline cutting through the fatigue. "You call the Colossian invasion peace?" Micah yelled, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "They bombarded the outer colonies for a month. 4 million civilians dead before Earth even managed to fire a shot in return. But they did it with localized orbital lasers, so it's okay, right? It was a clean slaughter. Regulated. Accord compliant." Micah laughed. It was an ugly, broken sound, a short, breathless bark that scraped against the pristine walls of the chamber. "You guys wrote laws to make war comfortable," Micah said, his voice dropping back down to a harsh whisper. "You wrote rules so you could kill each other over border disputes and still feel like civilized gentlemen at the end of the day. You made war a sport." He let go of the podium and took a step back, looking up at the vast dome. He felt a bead of sweat drip down his ribs, tracing the line of his old scar. He felt dirty. He felt painfully, tragically human. "We don't do that," Micah said. He dropped his gaze back to the Arbiter. The anger drained out of him, leaving only a hollow, terrible sadness. "For a long time, humanity tried to outgrow war. We really did. We built a beautiful blue world, and we told ourselves we were past the bloodshed. But before that, for about 10,000 years, we were the best in the universe at killing each other. We didn't have other species to fight. We just fought ourselves. Over dirt, over water, over imaginary lines drawn on paper." He reached into his left pocket. He bypassed the diplomatic data pad entirely. Instead, he pulled out a small, worn, physical book. It was bound in scuffed leather. It smelled like old paper, pipe tobacco, and mildew. It had belonged to his grandfather. He dropped it onto the podium. It hit the metal with a dull, heavy thud. "You want to talk about laws of combat?" Micah asked. A strange, chip-toothed smile spread across his face. It wasn't a triumphant smile. It wasn't a heroic smirk. It was the smile of a man who knew exactly how dark the dark could get and was looking at people who had never seen the night. "You claim we violated your laws, that we fought without restraint, that we unleashed our full savagery on the Colossians." Micah shook his head slowly. "That's a lie." The room was dead silent. The hum of the light seemed to fade into nothingness. "We held back," Micah whispered into the microphone. "We held back so much it tore us apart. Because if we hadn't held back, there wouldn't be a Colossian homeworld left for you to protect. We didn't ignore the rules of war. We just stopped using yours and started using ours." He pointed at the battered leather book. "This is a copy of a document from our history," Micah said, "compiled in a place called Geneva, centuries before we ever figured out how to leave our own atmosphere. It's a list of things we decided we could never, ever do to each other again." He tapped the cover of the book. Section 4, Article 35. Micah recited from memory, his voice dull. Prohibits weapons that cause superfluous injury. Section 3. Prohibits biological agents. Do you know what those are? We engineered viruses that only targeted specific genetic markers. We made diseases that would rot a man's lungs while he was still breathing, just to terrorize the soldiers in the trench next to him. A collective gasp, a shifting of scales, a rustling of robes moved through the alien delegates. The arbiter's mandibles twitched in disturbed confusion. We outlawed blinding weapons, Micah continued, relentless. Not because they killed, but because they left the enemy alive, sightless, a burden on their society. We outlawed landmines that looked like children's toys. We outlawed weapons that embedded plastic shrapnel in muscle tissue because plastic doesn't show up on an X-ray, meaning the surgeons couldn't pull it out and the victim would die of sepsis weeks later. Micah looked at the arbiter. His eyes were flat, dead. We didn't draft these laws to keep war polite, Micah said. His voice was a rasp. We drafted them because we know exactly what we are capable of. We wrote them to put a leash on the monster. You didn't fight beasts, Arbiter. You fought men on a leash. Micah leaned in, his smile fading into a grim, hollow expression. And if you ever bring another fleet to our skies, he said, the words heavy, sinking like stones into a frozen pond, we won't just break your accord. We'll take the leash off. Absolute stillness descended on the chamber. It wasn't a peaceful quiet, but the heavy, pressurized vacuum that precedes a hull breach. Micah's jaw ached. The peppermint gum had lost its artificial bite, dissolving into a rubbery, tasteless wad against his back teeth. He spat it into a crumpled paper napkin pulled from his trouser pocket, folded it meticulously, and shoved it back. The mundane rustle of the paper sounded like a gunshot in the massive amphitheater. To his left, the Colossian High Envoy stood. The alien was a towering pillar of segmented armor and bioengineered muscle. As it shifted its weight, the heavy carapace plates ground together, a sound exactly like dull kitchen knives scraping across wet slate. The envoy didn't use the central communication system. It clicked its mandibles in a rapid, aggressive sequence, forcing the translation earpieces in the room to work overtime. A desperate fiction. The translation matrix buzzed in Micah's ear, the synthetic voice failing to mask the envoy's dripping contempt. Your species is fractured. Your fleets are burning. You stand here covered in the filth of your own ruined colonies, offering historical ghost stories to delay the inevitable. You have no greater weapons. If you did, you would have used them when my dreadnoughts cracked the crust of your outer worlds. Micah closed his eyes. The fluorescent lights overhead were burning red silhouettes into his retinas. A sharp, phantom pain spiked through his ribs, radiating from the burned scar. Suddenly, he wasn't standing in the immaculate, sterile halls of the Galactic Council. He was back in the subterranean command bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains. He could smell the claustrophobic stench of that room, a suffocating blend of stale sweat, unwashed uniforms, ozone from overheating servers, and the bitter tang of cheap burnt coffee. He remembered standing next to General Thomas. Thomas hadn't slept in 9 days. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin the color of old ash. They had been watching the tactical feeds on the main monitors, watching Colossian orbital lasers carve surgical, precise, perfectly legal lines of glass across the agricultural centers of the colony world reach. They think this is a sport, Thomas had whispered, his voice cracking, staring at the casualty numbers ticking upward in thousands. They think because they use clean energy, it isn't a slaughter. Thomas had placed a trembling hand on the red-ringed authorization console. The keys to the deep vaults, the old vaults, the ones humanity had sealed a century before finding faster-than-light travel. Do we open them, Micah? Thomas had asked, coughing weakly. Do we show them the fire we kept buried? Micah had looked at the launch codes. He had thought about the cobalt, 6-0 salted warheads, gathering dust in the dark. Weapons designed not just to destroy a city, but to irradiate the bedrock so thoroughly that nothing would grow for 100,000 years. He thought about the biocontainment canisters, weaponized hemorrhagic fevers that caused a victim's capillaries to burst, drowning them in their own dissolving organs within hours. No, Micah had told the general, feeling sick to his stomach. If we let the monster out of the box, Thomas, we won't be able to put it back. We throw rocks at their ships. We die in the mud. We keep the leash on. Because if we don't, we stop being human. Micah opened his eyes. The sterile courtroom snapped back into focus. He looked up at the Colossian envoy. You think we fought you with everything we had? Micah asked. His voice didn't boom. It was a raspy, exhausted drawl. You think strapping thrusters to mining asteroids and ramming your ships was our peak military strategy? He let out a short, hollow breath. Envoy, if we wanted to eradicate you, we wouldn't have aimed for your ships, Micah said, leaning heavily on his good leg. We would have aimed for your atmosphere. We have warheads sitting in deep storage right now, packed with isotopes designed to strip a planet's ozone layer in a matter of days. We wouldn't have bothered fighting your soldiers. We would have just let your homeworld's local star burn your entire species alive while you choked on unfiltered radiation. The Colossian envoy froze. The mandibles stopped clicking. Or maybe, Micah continued, the words leaving a foul taste in his mouth, we would have deployed the atmospheric defoliants we locked away 3 centuries ago. Chemicals that alter the molecular structure of water vapor. Your rain would turn into an acid strong enough to melt steel beams and dissolve the calcium in your bones. Your oceans would boil into toxic sludge. You wouldn't have had a world left to defend. A new smell began to permeate the sterile air of the Grand Assembly. It was sharp, pungent. It smelled like ammonia and burnt sugar. It took Micah a second to realize what it was. It was alien sweat, the physical, biological reaction to absolute terror. They were releasing stress pheromones. Thousands of delegates, representing hundreds of enlightened, civilized star systems, were sweating through their silk robes and polished armor. We didn't use them, Micah said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He stared directly at the shifting, iridescent scales of the Arbiter. We threw iron slag at you. We hid in the mud. We blew ourselves up in minefields. We died by the millions. We took the hard road, because the easy road, the road where we stop holding back, leads to a universe where nothing survives. Not you. Not us. Just dead rocks spinning in the dark. He picked up the battered leather book from the podium. He flipped it open. The pages were yellowed, brittle under his thick fingers. Section 1. Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention, Micah read. His tone flat. He looked up. We outlawed the weaponization of diseases because we got too good at it. We engineered viruses that targeted specific crops. We made famines on demand. We starved millions of our own people over geopolitical disagreements. We did that to ourselves. Imagine what we could engineer to do to your biology, Envoy. The Colossian didn't answer. The towering armored figure slowly lowered itself back into its seat, the metal plates making no sound this time. The Arbiter's scales had lost their brilliant sheen. They were a dull, sickly gray now, the color of wet cement. The alien swallowed, a visible lump moving down its long, elegant throat. Representative Hayes, the Arbiter started. The booming artificial authority was gone from the translation speakers. It sounded entirely too quiet. If what you say is true, if your species possesses these apocalyptic capabilities, why are you here? Why stand trial? Micah laughed. It wasn't a triumphant sound. It was the sound of a man who realized the joke was on him. Because we are tired, Micah said simply. He let go of the microphone. His knees were shaking. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a crashing wave of fatigue that settled deep in his marrow. He wanted a hot shower. He wanted to sit on his back porch in Montana, feel the cold wind on his face, and drink a beer that didn't taste like spaceport rations. He wanted to unsee the mangled bodies of his squadmates. We are tired of bleeding, Micah said, looking around the massive room. The thousands of eyes staring back at him were no longer filled with disgust. They were wide, unblinking, horrified. And frankly, we are terrified of ourselves. We came here because we thought you were better than us. We thought the great galactic coalition had figured out a way to exist without slaughter. But you haven't. He shook his head, a gesture of profound disappointment. You just built better PR for your slaughter. You put it in a neat little box, wrapped it in accords, and called it civilized. Micah began to pack up his things. It didn't take long. He had nothing but a cheap plastic data pad and a half-empty pack of gum. He shoved them into the pockets of his ill-fitting suit jacket. So, here is how this is going to work, Micah said, not bothering to look at the arbiter. He was speaking to the room. He was speaking to the galaxy. There will be no surrender. Earth isn't disarming, and we aren't accepting coalition oversight. You will withdraw the collision fleets from the Orion sectors immediately. A low murmur started in the back rows, but a sharp, unified glare from the front tiers killed it instantly. We are offering a cessation of hostilities, Micah continued, zipping up his jacket. The cheap zipper caught halfway, and he had to yank it in frustration. You keep your accords. You keep your clean, gentlemanly wars. Stay on your side of the line. Don't push into our space. Don't poke the bear. He grabbed the thick, leather-bound book off the podium. He held it up one last time, making sure the dim overhead lights caught the gold leaf lettering on the spine. Then he dropped it. It hit the pristine, abstract curve of the alien desk with a heavy, final thud. Keep the book, Micah said, turning away from the microphone. Translate it. Read it carefully. Understand what you're looking at. He didn't wait for a dismissal. He didn't wait for a gavel to strike or a vote to be cast. Micah Hayes turned his back on the highest governing body in the known universe and started walking down the central aisle. His limp was pronounced now. He dragged his left leg slightly, the damaged joint locking up in the cold, sterile air. His shoulders were hunched. He looked small. He looked fragile. He looked like an ape wearing clothes that didn't belong to him. But as he shuffled toward the massive, vaulted exit doors, not a single alien spoke. The absolute silence returned, heavier and darker than before. They didn't watch an inferior species walking away. They watched a warden leaving the cell, terrified of the beast pacing behind the bars. Micah reached the heavy brass handles of the double doors. He pushed them open. The hallway beyond was brightly lit, smelling faintly of cleaning solvent. Before he stepped through, he paused. He glanced over his shoulder. The entire assembly was frozen, staring at the small, worn book sitting on the desk. Just remember, Micah's voice echoed one last time, unamplified, scraping against the pristine walls. That book isn't a threat. It's a confession. Don't make us write a sequel. He walked out. The heavy doors swung shut behind him. The latch clicked into place with a sharp, metallic snap. Inside the Grand Assembly, the air remained thick with the smell of ammonia and burnt sugar. Nobody moved to touch the book. They just stared at it, praying the leash would hold. Sometimes the most terrifying weapon a species can wield isn't an orbital strike, it's a mirror. We survive the stars not by being perfect, but by knowing exactly what hides in our own shadows. If Micah's brutal honesty gave you chills, hit that like button and share this story with a fellow sci-fi fan. Want more gritty HFY narratives where humanity rewrites the galactic rules? Subscribe to the channel right now. We'll see you in the dark.